Hello everybody. So I was just making a quick video here for something that will go a step further than my students will see in class in an upcoming semester. Here in a couple weeks, I am teaching software development with Java and software development with Python. And for the last year and a half, we've been following the trends of software development industry and kind of abandoned the built-in desktop GUI packages. And in classes, the Python class and the Java class, software development with Python and software development with Java, we've switched to using frameworks. Well, Python switched to the Django framework about a year and a half ago, and we build web applications in that. We also see some stuff with Flask there. We make our API with Flask. I would have made the API with Django, but um, give some variety. I'm thinking about switching back to just doing the API in Django as well. That way there's not quite so much information coming at once. But we've been using frameworks to build web applications. And in Java for the last, oh, yeah, I guess about the same amount of time, been building web applications with JSP pages instead of a local GUI package. So in those classes, the students see web applications. And there's supposed to be an elective that comes afterwards covering hybrid apps, where usually we start with a web application. And once that works, if we want a desktop application, we just launch that web application in a local window, something like the Electron framework or Towery, where it basically just it's a browser, but we take the browser bar, we take the address bar away and the tabs so that we can't go to any other web pages, uh, any other pages than that web application we want to load. We don't see that last step. That's hybrid apps. And the mobile apps are the same thing. We take that web application and just launch it on something that looks like a phone app. Uh, so we don't take that last step because those require lots of other languages. And the course where we're doing those frameworks is either Python specific or Java specific. And it does require several other languages, but that elective course that follows it keeps not running. So I guess students aren't seeing that last step there. And that one's an elective. They have to choose either Python or Java. Uh, so they have to take one of those and see the frameworks, but then they don't see the step afterwards where we turn that web application into a desktop application. So I wanted to make a video to fill in that last step for the students coming up this fall, or for anyone else that was interested. This is the third video I've made that's almost identical. I did one with a HTML JavaScript app. I included a CSS file, but I think that was just out of habit and left it blank. Uh, we just need to see the app working part. And then I did a video with the Spring Boot framework for a Java application that runs as a web app, and then launched that in the Electron framework. So for the Python students, I did want to make one specific for Django, because that's what they'll see in class. And I have a little application here. This is actually the in-class example from when I taught that in the spring. So here's a Django application. You can see manage.py is right there. So if I run that real quick, this is how far the students will get in the class. So we'll have the Python interpreter, look at the manage.py script, and run the run server function, which will start us up something on our local machine. Let's see, 127.0.0.1, 8000. So we come over to a browser and we can just check localhost port 8000 and see that Django app running. Just a tip calculator. Tip calculators and payroll calculators are my go-to example. Most Americans seem to understand the mathematics involved in that coming in, and then for class examples, we can just focus on that. Nothing fancy here. We enter a meal price, move the slider for lousy service or good service, and hit calculate button, and it tells us what our total should be. Basic tip calculator, nothing fancy. But whatever the app is, you probably want to do this with a much fancier web application. Once the web application runs, then we want to launch that as a desktop, not in a browser, so that we can run it offline and all sorts of things like that. So we'll use the Electron framework. So I'm here in the Django project. If you've set up Django projects, this should look familiar. There's the thing that matches the name of the project overall, and there's one of the applications in that project, our manage.py. I usually split up urls.py into multiple ones, so I don't go with just the project, because usually Django applications are much more, uh, much larger than this, so we'll have lots of applications inside the project. So having just one URLs folder at the top level can be a little confusing, but that's the Django part. Once the Django project's together, we need to turn this into something that can launch with the Electron framework. So the Electron framework, the super simplified version of it, is it uses Node.js, which is server-side JavaScript, along with the Chromium engine. That's the power horse behind the browser, like we know. So, like here, the Google Chrome browser. We mostly think about the GUI, the graphical user interface, in front, but there's a powerful engine running that all in the background. So we just need that part. I guess this gray line here. If we get rid of everything above this little gray line, all this stuff, the main web page part, would look like a normal desktop application. So it does that. It just gets rid of the browser bar and the tabs, so we can't go to a different web page. And then all of this part, for our web app, we just see the web application part. We'll style it with CSS to make it look really nice. And, well, for the sake of this video, power that web application with Django. So Node.js should be the top search results no matter which search engine you use, nodejs.org. And right at the top of their page is the downloads. If you're new to Node.js, you probably want the long-term support version. If you want to be a beta tester, you can download the latest version and help them look for bugs. But just download and install the latest long-term support version. And then once that's running, we can jump over to a terminal. I'll use PowerShell here. And once it's installed, npm or npx are our commands to access Node.jpm or Node.js. I don't know why I said PM. I think because I was typing that. npm accesses Node.js, or npx. We'll just use an npm here. So we're in that folder. If we run init, it's going to ask us a few questions. What do we want to call this package? And this just writes a JSON file. We could write that JSON file ourselves. We will have to do some editing to it, but we'll see that in a second. Version 1's good. Description. We want to launch a Django web app in Electron desktop. Something like that. As a desktop app with Electron framework. So just a quick description of what we're doing. What's our entry point going to be? Index.js, that'll work. We'll need to create that file in a moment. I'm going to skip test command. We could just skip all of this and write the JSON file ourselves. Keywords, if we want to search for it, I'll just throw my name in here. And I'm a fan of open source, so I usually use the MIT or Apache license. All of that looks good. We will need to come back and change this scripts part. We'll see that in a moment. That looks good, so go ahead and write that JSON file. If we list this out, we see now along with that with the Django stuff, there's this new JSON file here, which just has this right here. It's not a very large JSON file. We also need the Electron framework though. So we'll have Node.js install that. So npm, let me write at the top. I think that'll come through better on the video. npm install Electron. And this will download some stuff. Should just take a couple seconds to download. There we go. And if we list out the files, you can see now we have this folder called Node Modules. We're done in PowerShell for a second, so I'm going to close this. And one quick note, you will probably be doing some version control, have Git going on. Make sure you put node modules in your git ignore file. That's just the library we're using, the packages. We won't be making any changes to those whatsoever. They do not need to be included in our version control. And you'll notice it's 236 megabytes um, of text files. So if you don't put those in your git ignore, that's going to take a long time to upload and download to GitHub. So make sure you ignore that folder. Otherwise, we're ready to start putting our parts together for the Electron framework. We're just going to look at the bare minimum here. The bare minimum we need to do in order to launch this Electron framework. Launch this web application as a desktop application. Obviously, there'll be a lot more we can do, but for starters, I just wanted to see the bare minimum. So we need a text editor. So I use Sublime. So I'm going to open Sublime text editor with a dot for the current directory. So open the current project in Sublime. Here's all of our files. Here's package.json. We will need to add something to scripts so it knows where to start. We'll get that right before we see our run command. That way you see how those two tie together instead of seeing that 5 minutes later. I have a terminal set up, Terminix set up, so I can just access the normal terminal from here. So I'll have Sublime create we can see here that JSON file. Main, this is where we're going to launch everything, is going to launch from index.js. So we need to create that index.js file. And this one is boilerplate code. Once you type it once, it's you can copy and paste it and just make small edits for any of your web applications you want to launch in the Electron Framework desktop. So I'm going to set up a couple constants. Actually, everything here is going to be constants. We have 3 keywords to set up our variables. Var gives us function scope, so the variable will exist in the entire time for the function that it's inside of. Let gives us block scope, so in between 2 curly braces. So from the opening curly brace, from where we create the variable until we hit the next closing curly brace is how long that a variable will exist. And constant is like let, only for constants, not for variables. Nothing here is going to change, so I'm going to do this here. There are 2 things I need to import. So I want to import the app and browser window classes from the Electron framework. And this is just the JavaScript syntax for that. So since this is related to Python, you think from Electron import app, comma, browser window. Just a different syntax to do that same thing we do all the time in Python. Did a whole bunch of times in our Django app before even getting to this part. And then we need a function that's going to launch. So function needs some sort of name. It's the Electron main method. Obviously, we make up that name, so just give it some sort of useful name. And what we need is an instance of this browser window class. So it's not going to change, so I'm going to make it a constant instead of a variable. Launch window is, call it whatever you want. What matters is that it's a new browser window instance. And we do have semicolons in JavaScript. Semicolons are optional in JavaScript, but it is considerably faster if the computer does not have to figure out where the semicolons go. The computer can take time to figure that out, but it takes a lot of time to do it. You will notice it at human timescales if you leave even 1 semicolon off. And then our parameters go in as key value pairs, but in a certain syntax. So it's not like Python key value pairs. The big difference is our keys look like variables. And there's 3 that we kind of have to put in. We need to give it a title. This is just a tip calculator. I'll call it tipper. And the title is what shows up at the top bar of the window on a Windows or Linux. Or on a Mac, and that's the reason why we absolutely have to put this up there in that top menu bar. You have the application option. If you don't give it a title, then the Mac OS can't figure out what label to put for your app menu up there. Then we need a width and a height. How big is it going to be? I'll just do 777, height 444, just because those are the numbers I used in the one for the Spring Boot application with Java in a previous video. Doing basically the exact same thing. If you watch that video, this stuff should all look very familiar. And now that we have created an object from that class, we can just use that object to launch a URL. I guess we better set the URL first. Instead of typing it directly in, I'll save it to a variable so we can reference it. And what URL do we want to run? Well, the one where our Python app is at, or our Django application is at. So it's going to be an HTTP, because we did not include an S on the local testing run. And we go into localhost, port 8000 is where we ran that from. End of instruction. And then we'll have that instance of our browser window call its load URL method and load that app URL we just created, the one pointed at our Django app. Then we'll come down after this function. So here's the curly brace that ends that main method. And this other one we imported, the app, will have app. Well, it has a method when ready. They had some nice names here. So when it's ready, then we want to do something. And it is also called then. So when ready, then do some stuff. And the stuff we want to do goes in here. And what we want to do is call this. So we put it in as a callback, electron main method, which means the function name as a variable. So a variable holding instructions. And then whenever the app is ready, it will add the parentheses in there to run those instructions. So make sure it's just the name, no parentheses. You don't want it running too soon. And that's all we need to do to launch that as a window. The last thing, we do need to tell Node.js how to launch it. So I'm going to come back over to that package.json file. And under scripts, I'm going to create another key value pair. Oh, whoops. Make sure you put a comma here, because we have more than one script. I'll call it Tipper, the name of the app. And whenever Node.js sees that key, what it needs to do is start the Electron framework in the current directory. So Electron and then dot for the current directory. So that should be enough to run it. So if we start up PowerShell here, Windows X, then I'll hit I. Oh, I probably could have gone to that directory. Document /delete /tipper. Thanks where it was. Yeah, here it is. So we can start our server, have the Python interpreter, look at the manage.py script, and run the run server method, if I can spell it correctly. And when this is running, well, it keeps running. It doesn't stop. So we need another terminal window in order to do the Node.js stuff. So go to Documents, Delete folder, and then Tipper. So here's where that index.js is, and the package.json. So we'll have npm, so Node.js, npm run Tipper, that key that we just put in the package.json file. And when it does this, it'll open up our window, and the server's running, so it launches that looking like a normal desktop application. What are we at? 19 minutes. So we can squeeze one other thing in here real quick. It still works the same. Maybe 1234 with really great service, and we get what our total should be. Yeah, it ran before we just launched it in a different place. Nothing changed about the app itself. And if you have a more interesting app, it's going to be about the same. Last thing I want to put in here real quick is something that was never shown in any of my programming classes. So I like to include it in pretty much every programming class I teach, is what do we do when the app's finished? Because we usually don't give the end user a bunch of files where they have to open their terminal and run them. Every once in a while, we do that for when we know our end user is going to be a computer expert, but typically we give them something to click on. So I'm on a Windows machine, so I'll do it in a batch file. So let me create another file here. I'll use Sublime to create a file called launch tipper.bat. So I'll do it as a batch file here on Windows, but if you're on a Linux machine, you'd want a .sh. Mac OS has .command files, but nobody uses those. Most people just use the .sh like Linux on the Macs. And Electron is completely cross-platform. So in a realistic situation, you would probably create both or all three: the batch file for the Windows, the shell script for the Linux, and a shell script for the Mac OS to launch it. So I'm doing a batch file. So first thing, need to turn echoes off so we don't see every instruction that runs. Then we just need to run those two commands to start it. So Python, just going to look at manage.py and call the run server method. And then Node.js is going to run tipper. Those same two things we did, with a little bit of a catch, because I pointed this out a moment ago. Remember, the Python server is going to keep running. Well, Node.js is also going to keep running. So if this one keeps running, we're never going to get to the second line. So to split that up, we can say start before each one, and then they'll each start in separate terminals, basically. And we probably don't want to see those, so add in the /min parameter. That way they start in a minimized terminal and spins up that Django server, and then it'll start in a minimized terminal and have Node.js run our app. And that gives us something we can double click on to give the user. So here's that file. So now if I just double click on it, we see the flash, but we see those servers spin up there, and there's our Django app launch there. They took shake away. Used to be able to just shake a window and all the other windows would go away. I missed that. So put in some price, maybe really lousy service, and our app still works like it did. It just looks like a desktop app. But one thing to notice is when we close it, I hit close, and down here, that server is still running. So make sure you close your server. I just hit Control C there. I was expecting something to show up on there, and it finished running here, but we didn't close that window we used to run it. So there's obviously more stuff we could do. There's a lot of stuff in the Electron framework. It's a big, huge framework. We can add it lots of fine-grained controls, such as closing our stuff when we're done. If we launch it again, we have this menu. So things like assign functions to these menu buttons. Exit works, but when we click that, our stuff's still running. We might want to add in close those terminals, but in this case, I just wanted to show the bare minimum to get that running. So for those who had the Python course recently or are taking it this fall, since that requires several non-Python languages, we don't take that in this course, but we will get to a Django app. So once your Django app's running, that's all you need to do. So have Node.js initialize the project, then install the Electron framework, add something in package.json for Node.js to start the app, and then create your run window. And this is the bare minimum. And it always looks like this, so you can copy and paste, and all that would probably change is this. But if you're doing lots of Django apps, they're all going to be on localhost port 8000, so you wouldn't even have to change that to start a different Django app. And then probably a batch file so that the users has something to click on. If you right click and create a shortcut from that, then the shortcut you can change the icon on and logo and all of that. And that's what the end users would see. But then we created a web application so we could make it, this one does not look nice, but we could make it look really, really nice with CSS and then just launch it as a local desktop application. That's the modern way for releasing desktop applications. And we don't take that last step in the Python course, we get up to the Django app, launch it in browser, and then that's good enough for the course. And the elective that would continue on and show this part seems to not be running, so nobody's seeing that last step. So I just thought I'd make a video. Hope you find that helpful. You can see it's really, really easy to get our, once we have a web application debugged, to just launch it as a desktop application instead of a web application, and to launch it as a browser app, or sorry, not a browser app, to launch it as a phone app is the exact same thing. We just launch it in a different type of window. We launch it in a phone for a phone. Hope you found that helpful.